History tells us the Utah Utes are in for a big bounce back season in 2025, and we're breaking down how and why on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first view and listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts. If this is your first time listening, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the comments on YouTube. Today's episode of our show is brought to you by GameTime. You can download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, crossover episode with Locked On Big 12's Drake Toll. Me and Drake talk about the polarizing reaction to Utah being named by Las Vegas, as well as ESPN, a team that could win, and even in ESPN's case, the team that's going to win the Big 12 in 2025. Then get into a little conference realignment talk as well. So hope you enjoyed today's crossover episode of Locked On Utes and Locked On Big 12.
That's JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes. Las Vegas. Las Vegas, JT. They like to make money. They want to make lines that make them money. They don't want to push this. I say, and this is not even political, election lines. Okay, you see somebody as a big favorite in an election when it comes to Las Vegas, where the money is. That's what you can track to see how legitimate a lot of things are at that level, because there are real dollars involved and no one wants to lose. So insider trading is done in a lot of these Las Vegas lines. So to see Utah, some sportsbooks picking Utah as their Big 12 champion, or ESPN picking them in the college football playoff, winners of the Big 12. How did we get here? They were 5-7 last season, and we still don't know exactly what they're going to look like next year, whereas in Iowa State, it's a pretty clear look to them. How did we get here?
I think we got here by looking at the past history of this conference and appreciating that it is the most unpredictable conference in the Big 12, understandably, because of how Utah was last year. Drake, I think there's people that share your sentiment that you shared on your own show last week when talking about this, where you said, as stupid as that sounds, when talking about Utah being the favorite among Big 12 teams. But if we look at the history of this conference, first of all, we can even start with Arizona State or even Iowa State by this example. There has not been a team to make the conference championship game in back-to-back years since Colorado did it in 2004 and 2005. In fact, the last just member in the Big 12 to make a conference championship game back-to-back years, that would be the Utah Utes 21-22, in which they were able to win it. So outside of those top teams, how can we also then look at the rest of the conference and how it's going to go out? You know, Texas Tech had a strong year. BYU, right? We already mentioned Arizona State a little bit. Well, there's something that bears keeping in mind, and that's something that Bill Conley in his ESPN article does discuss. That's the regression we often see in one-score games on a year-to-year basis. And this is something that tracks year after year. If you go back to 2021, Oklahoma State and Baylor went a combined 10-3 in one-score games. What happened the next year? Then they were a combined 13-13. 22, TCU's magical run. They were 6-1 in one-score games, and then they didn't make a bowl game. And then how about in 2023, you see teams that were 5-1, and then they didn't win like Oklahoma State. Then they didn't win a conference game this year. So what teams could that be? Texas Tech 6-1, Iowa State 5-1, ASU 6-2, BYU 4-2 in those one-score games. A lot of times those margins you see them flip. Two teams that were very bad in them: Utah, Kansas, 1-5. And a team like Utah, they lost 5 games by a combined 23 points. And every single one of those losses was a game in the fourth quarter. I'll talk about why I think Utah specifically could be the bounce back candidate. But if you look at the history of this conference, expecting the top to resembling what it was a season ago, usually a mistake based on what actually plays out.
As you know, I picked Utah and Kansas in my Big 12 title last year, and both of those schools had plenty of one-score games they were on the opposite side of. Are you saying, at least based on trends, it's what it sounds like, that Utah and Kansas are the two teams that everyone should be high on in 2025?
I think they're the two teams everyone should be high on to bounce back in a major way in this conference. Look, this is Locked On Utes, so I'm going to talk about the Utah perspective. What was the biggest reason Utah was bad last year? They had bad quarterback play. They got Devon Dampier, who led college football in yards per rush. All players, like even running backs included. No one ran for more yards last year than Devon Dampier. So you're like, okay, that's one thing, but can he throw? Well, he had overall, 3,934 total yards, 31 touchdowns too. So he was an incredibly dynamic player. 58, this is a great stat that I found on X. 58 players threw for at least 2,500 passing yards in college football. 36 FBS player ran for 1,000 yards. Only one did both. That's Devon Dampier. He did it in Jason Beck's offense. Jason Beck led the fourth best offense in college football a year ago with Dampier at the helm. That is now Utah's offensive coordinator. The two of them combining. Wayshawn Parker, the transfer running back from Washington State, was pretty much everyone's a top 5 running back transfer. So that's a big add.
Utah Number 1 for some. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. Utah returns all 5 starters up front. One of the best tackle duos in college football. And just because you return all 5 up front, I will say that doesn't mean you're always going to be good, because we saw what happened to Oklahoma State. But I do feel really good about 3 to maybe even 4 of those pieces coming back for Utah. It's not the greatest group of wide receivers. I can admit that right away. But the strength of this team is going to be the running game, and there are at least capable guys who can make some plays on the outside. Then the defense. Look, last year, second in the conference, only allowing 20 points per game. They returned 3 of their best 4 linebackers from a year ago, 2 of their 4 best interior defensive tackles, only 1 of their top 3 defensive ends. That's when we need Steeple to step up. 3 of their 4 best safeties, then 2 of their best 4 corners. So then you go, okay, do you trust Utah's developmental history? Well, Drake, Utah has more players drafted in the NFL over the last decade than any other Big 12 program. And 13 of the last 14 Super Bowls, Utah has been represented in. Kyle Whittingham's a heck of a head coach. Morgan Scalley is one of the best defensive coordinators. Jason Beck's coming off a heck of a year. I trust this Utah program to bounce back in 25.
I don't think Dalton Kincaid has made any of those Super Bowls, right?
No, he hasn't.
It's tough. Other Utah players not named Dalton Kincaid have been in that bunch over the last, 14 years? 14 years?
13 in the last 14. Yeah, like this
14.
year, Britton Covey, they're the fun punt returner.
Yeah, Utah Utes. This is to me, the parity of the league stands out first, where you could say next year, hey, Arizona will take a step up. Why? It's the Big 12. But why? No, it's just kind of the Big 12. Okay, but what are the reasons? Because 3-9 Arizona State. You're like, oh, well, they have a couple guys returning. Cam Scatterbu is good, and Sam Levitt's unproven, but he could, there were so many what ifs. So it was really hard preseason to jump on the bandwagon of Arizona State. And there would not be a way a year ago for you to justify to me Arizona State going to the college football playoff. It would be idiotic. Then, because the nature of development in this conference, they wind up going from 16-1, winning the league, going to the Big 12 championship. Do you think that, and this is a hard question to reckon with for me, but I want to pitch it to you. Do you believe Utah today is in a better spot than Arizona State was a year ago, remembering how improbable them winning the conference was on February 4th of 2024?
I've made this point several times on my show, Drake. They are undoubtedly in a better position than Arizona State was. Arizona State lost in Rice-Eccles Stadium the previous year before they just went on this run, 55-3. Embarrassed, outclassed everything. And a year later, they win the whole conference. That is an insane turnaround.
And beat Utah on the way, by the way. Yeah.
Exactly. They did. And I just laid out all the reasons why I think this Utah team can bounce back, but I just think they are clearly better on paper. They have more going for them. I know he's coming off a down year. We still think higher of Kyle Whittingham right now than we did Kenny Dillingham a year ago. We all liked Kenny Dillingham, but the resume wasn't there. We all like Cam Scatterbu. I didn't see him being what I would call maybe the second best back in all of college football, only behind Genty. So there were just so many pieces in an improbable way. That's why I look at a Utah and a Kansas as the two I mentioned, hey, there's just a lot to like about those teams on paper. And also, one thing that goes along with Utah too is, look, I know last year the home field, they didn't perform great at home field. If you look at their body of work, they have won. The last time they lost at home to an unranked team was 2017. And even they had a stretch where they were undefeated at home for years until finally Oregon toppled them before the previous season. So it's a really good home field advantage that Utah has too. I feel better about several teams right now currently than I did to win the Big 12 this year than I did about Arizona State last year.
Today's show is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime's where I'm going. The Super Bowl is coming up, and it's I've never been able to really afford the Super Bowl, and it's kind of expensive, but with GameTime, you will get the best price, the lowest price guaranteed. If you're looking for tickets to the Super Bowl, GameTime Picks is the app that does the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. The curated deals make it super simple. I grabbed the super deal for a prime seat, couldn't believe the value. It was just easy and honestly a steal. The seat view feature is a game changer. Before I hit buy, I can see exactly where my seat is. And best part, you're covered with GameTime's lowest price guarantee. They'll refund you 110% of the difference if you find a cheaper ticket. Ready to make the next event even better? Download the GameTime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege. $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, and that is guaranteed. JT, the ACC is decided. Now, I do. This is Locked On Big 12. So we're going to make a very Big 12 today. That the ACC will be gone as it exists in 2031. There is a cheaper fee for Miami or Clemson or Florida State or UNC to exit. I do believe they're going to exit at that point. That is my opinion. However, between now and then, what benefits those schools and keeps them there is the fact they can make more money in a new revenue model that offers that dough to the schools who have the biggest brands. Should the Big 12 adopt that? And I think the addendum to that question is, if they do, is Utah a school that benefits from it?
I think Utah would be a school that benefits, but I will say, I think it's when you're talking about the brands of Clemson, Florida State, UNC, Miami, those are all bigger brands to me than anything the Big 12 does have to offer. I don't think Utah is the biggest brand in the Big 12. I think they could get there if they had built they went back to back a couple years ago, right? Like if they could build something like that, a three-peat, like maybe that would be something I'd much rather see. And this probably isn't realistic because we're always going to reward the brands. I'd much rather see just if the teams that win the more are the ones that get the most. But this is a smart model by the ACC to, like you said, just kind of buy themselves some time till they eventually have to walk the plank as a conference more than likely. But I would love this model for Utah. I think they have a chance to be on the top end, but I don't know. I mean, Drake, you tell me, you cover the conference. I don't feel like there's a big difference between Utah, West Virginia, Baylor, Texas Tech. There's nowhere near the difference between those schools that there is UNC, the ACC ones. And then you mentioned Wake Forest and Boston College. That's just a big difference to me.
So I don't want to cop out here, but I do want to almost answer your question with a question, or at least add a bit of clarity to those who are like, well, the Big 12 is very even. That is true. But in a revenue-sharing model like this, it would go year by year based on who made the conference the most money. That amount of money might be poured back into their pocket. So even if Utah doesn't go back-to-back, if Utah's very, very good in 2025, terrible in 2026, they're going to be gifted an unequal revenue share for their success in that one season. So it's almost the question of, should we say, hey, Arizona, you were the worst team in 2025. You're going to make $10 million less than Utah. You were the best team in 2025. In 26, it flips, and now Arizona gets that $10 million extra, and that gap widens when Utah is the bottom team in the Big 12 conference. I think the question for me becomes less of who is the dominant brand, how separated are we, and more so, hey, here is incentive to be the best school in the league.
I like that. I think the problem would be, and this is where I know you just threw out 10 million as an example.
Sure.
One thing we love about college football is the parity. And in today's playoff, and I'm very curious to see how Notre Dame getting all of the money that they got from their run affects their ability to bring in elite transfer portal talent through NIL, through recruiting deals, because money is everything in the sport right now. So would a model like that prevent an Arizona from doing what Arizona State, their rival, did just last year, going from everyone's worst to becoming first? So that's where I think that becomes scary when you're in danger of harming just the competitive spirit of the game. But I do absolutely agree that if you win the conference, you do, and you win games, and like you said, especially if it's more towards wins than just, BYU, and I'm just using BYU as an example. Don't crush me, BYU fans. Just because they're BYU, they get more money. Like that, I've never liked that. I want the teams to be rewarded for winning. If they get the most money because they played in the biggest games, like ranked matchups, the highest performance, that's what they should be rewarded for throughout the season. Not just, hey, we're back to the ACC, we're Miami, we should be respected because we're the Canes. I don't like that.
I do believe the ACC is going to go awry in a lot of that. They're going to say, hey, you are just because you are. This is the model the College Football Playoff Committee adopts as well. They're going to give the SEC and Big Ten more money no matter what. The next year could be a colossal year for the Big Ten. They get one team in. The Big 12 gets two teams, three teams because of that, and they will still get millions and millions more because the model already built. Whereas in March Madness, if the Big 12 has the entire Elite Eight that won't matter. The revenue share is much more equally split. And the Big 12 moving to a model where the ACC, I do think, is going to favor a Clemson or Florida State year in and year out because of their overall brand is something that would ultimately be unfair. Is there the idea, though, that now we've incentivized this to where if you're a Utah, we'll say just as an example, and you go 2 years missing a bowl game, now you mentioned the gap is widening between you and the schools who are getting the unequal revenue share, making more money. As that gap widens, is that incentive for you to pony up to win right now and make sure you put yourself back in that conversation? To me, it almost adds more fire under these athletic directors to win immediately rather than settling, because the more you settle, the further away everyone else gets from you.
Do you feel like there are brands and schools in the Big 12 currently settling and not trying to go all in for a year-to-year basis?
Yeah, there are. And it's not exactly their fault necessarily, but a Cincinnati or even an Iowa State, I'm not going to pick on the new guys, Cincinnati or Iowa State have both expressed athletic revenue concerns. Yeah. We've seen Iowa State pause projects on their athletic departments, their arena or stadium improvements. We've seen Cincinnati or a Houston struggle because football has not been there since they joined the Big 12. And they're even asking the questions of, how do we support this revenue sharing? Can we commit fully to revenue sharing? Whereas a private school like Baylor can say, hey, we're committed to revenue sharing. And by the way, one of our donors is now married to Bill Gates. We're going to be okay long term. So I do see some Big 12 schools. Oklahoma State in the last year has come out and said, we're going to put more into NIL. We need to focus more on our athletes. We're going to cut our coach's budget. We're going to cut his contract to give more to the athletes. So at that point, I think there are Big 12 schools that would have, like I said, a fire lit underneath you to win right now, because the rest of the league is very quickly leaving you. That's very big picture amongst the Big 12. I think you could have, there are two clear schools of thought that I don't disagree with. If you're on the side of unequal revenue share, equal revenue share, I can probably find a way to come to agreement or come to terms with you no matter what. What we probably will struggle more to agree on is Mark Harlan, the athletic director at Utah, and Kirby Hocutt, the AD at Texas Tech. How they handled similar-ish controversies on how the Big 12 responded to those. Should Mark Harlan get a couple dollars back from his fine? That's where we'll go next on a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Utes crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes. Mark Harlan in November after the BYU game came to the podium, said we were excited to be in the Big 12 tonight. That we're not. He was very upset that the game was stolen from us. We have beaten that dead horse as much as you can. Had that conversation multiple times. This is less about that and more about what could be, from, I think, a Utah fan's point of view, a double standard. Bear with me a second while I give you context of JT Toppin, basketball player for Houston, or for, I should say, for Texas Tech, jumps in the air to throw a pass, hits the nether region of a Houston player with his leg. Referees call it a flagrant 2. In a very confusing deal, they throw him out of the game. From there, Grant McCasland, the head coach of Texas Tech, flips out. He gets ejected. Toppin's ejected. The athletic director posts, Kirby Hocutt posts, I'm appalled, disappointed, egregious decision. He rips into the officials. He says he called Brett Yormark immediately. Brett Yormark said the situation would be addressed. There will be accountability. He says they're proud of the leadership of Coach McCasland. That's a lot different than how the Big 12 responded to Mark Harlan. They came and said, Mark Harlan, you owe the largest fine we've ever given to an AD in this conference's history. Whereas, according to Hocutt, Yormark says there will be accountability, but not for you for complaining, for the officiating crew. Is this a slap in the face to Utah?
No, it's a completely different situation. I mean, you look at what Mark Harlan deserved.
Okay, whoa, watch out. Here we go now.
I got a lot of respect for Mark Harlan. He absolutely deserved his fine. And also actions speak louder than words, right? The Texas Tech athletic director waited till after the game to then make a statement and put it out. And he said he was appalled and upset over a decision. Mark Harlan was so appalled and upset over a decision, he made himself part of the story. He walked onto the field. The final TV shot, you see him yelling at the refs, and his post-game comments, they're so different that, like, I'm appalled by this decision, Texas Tech's AD. How about Mark Harlan? This game was absolutely stolen from us. We were excited about being in the Big 12, but tonight I am not. That right there, especially the latter one. When you say you are not excited to be in your new conference, you can't do that. Like you know what's happening at that point when you make a statement like that to me. So to me, this is a way different situation. I'd love to say like this is unjust, but no, Mark, we've seen athletic directors do what happened with Texas Tech. We have not seen. I mean, Drake, can you remember an athletic director saying, and this just comes to the new conference realignment, right? Like, we're not happy to be in this conference today. He did, I do believe, just watching it back, he specifically meant today, like in this exact moment, this minute,
Right.
all of that. But the end of the day, you cannot say that about a conference you just joined or just a conference in general. So Mark deserved his fine. I do believe that.
Very interesting. Do you feel as though Kirby Hocutt he holds no punches back? I mean, he posts publicly appalled, disappointed, egregious. He says the officials were bad, were terrible. The head coach, Grant McCasland, gets kicked out. He a fit of rage publicly. Like, I don't want to say embarrassed himself necessarily, because if you watch it back, and to be honest with you, JT, if you watch back some of those calls against BYU, Utah fans would make the case that those were egregious, right? And if Mark Harlan had come out and said in a statement, this was egregious, we're appalled, I still see a lot of similarities between some of the verbiage used. One was a Twitter graphic. One was post game on the podium. I think if Hocutt had been in the arena and taken the microphone and said this same thing, we're probably talking about a different story. It's almost a situational deal where, let's say Mark Harlan was on vacation with his family that week or at a wedding for his niece, and he had put a Twitter graphic out. Maybe he's not fined. To me, there is a bit of a double standard there where one guy is going to be fined because of what he said, and via the platform he said it on at a podium, as opposed to a Twitter graphic, whereas the words are still fairly similar.
At the end of Drake, who dishes out the fines at the end of the day? Not just the Big 12, but who does this start with? All of it.
Brett Yormark, what do you think?
Brett Yormark. And who did Kirby Hocutt go to? He went to Brett Yormark. He spoke to him, the decision. He said, I spoke with him, assured me the situation would be addressed. He went about this a different way versus what did Mark Harlan do? He directly called out the entire league. And once again, like this goes back to the reason these two situations are totally different is one is talking about specifically a call made, never once says, we are disappointed to be in the Big 12 at this moment. Yeah. The other says that. And when you take a shot at the conference as a whole, that's where you're going to draw that fine at the end of the day. So to me, that is the clear difference between these two. And also, I also feel like Texas Tech, I'm just being real. Like, I think they were more justified in their frustration. I think that, and we've talked about this a lot, I wish they would have let the hold go. Yes, but there is more of a grab versus how things played out. I do understand the frustration because he is jumping, trying to get the ball, ends up kicking him in an unfortunate spot. So that's how I view this, as just a different situation. And I'm good with their decision not to fine him at all. I don't feel like it's a slap in the face because look, it's just, you can't go out there, criticize your boss and Brett Yormark. Well, he's not Mark Harlan's boss, but you know what I mean? Like, but just someone you're in a partnership with, and expect no repercussions to the level, like literally calling them out saying we're not happy here versus saying, hey, your officials did a bad job. To me, that's different the way they went about it. Hocutt went about the right way. Mark Harlan didn't, simply put.
Can then Mark Harlan rip a page out of Hocutt's book? Is this where we all, and not even Harlan to call out, Jamie Pollard at Iowa State or anybody else in this conference who holds an athletic director role, can they all rip a page out of Kirby Hocutt's book and say, okay, that's how we should do it from now on when we're mad?
Absolutely. There's not a fine. That's absolutely how I should do it. And I do think look, being a ref's hard. Like, there's a human element. You're going to make mistakes and you have to be held accountable. And I think it's okay to call out and say, hey, this wasn't right. And it's also okay for, in that statement, like, to admit, like, hey, Brett, I've talked to Brett Yormark and he said they will be addressing this and going over it. I don't doubt that they're going to review this and take a better look at it and make an outcome from there. So I have no problem with other teams doing this. I don't have a problem. It's like I said, once again, it's about what Mark Harlan did, right? Like, surprising everyone coming up to the podium, saying it there. Mark, I think there's been controversial calls in the past where Mark Harlan has put out a statement like, we're disappointed in this and we're going to explore an explanation with the Pac-12. That is how these things normally play out. Mark Harlan diverted from that path, and that's where he ended up getting himself in that trouble in the end. So, but I do expect more Big 12 coaches, athletic directors to do this. And I don't think there's any problem with that, because I think it's good when we can call each other out and try to hold each other in check to make sure mistakes like this don't happen in the future. Because I don't think the situation that happened with Texas Tech is going to happen again, at least not this season.
I hope not. And accountability is huge when it comes to officiating crews and what we consider to be the best college basketball conference in America. And that looks diluted this year, but still the officiating, I think Utah fans have probably seen it. I know for sure that BYU fans seem to be complaining often about it. And rightfully so for all of us. The last 5 years, I've just facepalm watching one out of every like 3 or 4 Big 12 games because the officiating is so inconsistent in a very physical league. Hokut to say that is something that I feel comfortable also saying. I'll say it on a microphone or on a Twitter graphic, and I don't really care. I think he's got a very good point, drove it home, and you're right. I mean, this is something that, man, an egregious call like that shouldn't happen again, and you would hope because of these actions, because the conference holds them accountable, it won't happen again. JT, where can folks find more of your work?
You guys can head over to Locked On Utes on X, keeping all the things latest Utah content going, and make sure you guys like and subscribe. Also, my personal handle at JT Wistrcill. Drake, always fun joining you and looking forward to the Big 12 show later this week, too.
Absolutely. Thursday night that will release. We'll talk Big 12 schedule release that is coming out soon, maybe out by the time you're watching this. This has been, it always will be, a crossover between Locked On Utes and Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.